My Indian name is Chadasha. It means red hawk. And my English name is Hollydale Allen. My mom is Minerva Allen, or Minerva Krantz Allen, and my father is John William Allen. I was born at Fort Belknap in January 1961. My grandparents are Felicitas Chopwood on my mom's side and Ernest Krantz Sr. on my mom's side. My dad's mother was Charlotte Blackbull, and my dad's dad is William James Allen, or Boots, as they call him. I'm half a Assiniboine, a 16th Gros-Ventre, and a 16th Sioux, and I'm an 8th Little Shell. Being a Assiniboine means that, to me, I always fall back on it because it always completed me, and I knew where I was from. My mom's family, she still had her grandmas. So they were my great-grandmas, Victoria Hazigal and Lucille Belknap Chopwood. And they didn't speak, Grandma Vic spoke both Assiniboine and English, but my great-grandma, Lucille, her sister, just spoke Assiniboine. And my grandmothers, who were my mom's aunts, they would converse in Assiniboine too, as well as my mom and dad. And it was always done at home. They never did it in public. Well, they all went to boarding school. My great-grandma went to boarding school. My mom's mother ended up in Chamawa. My mom was in Flandreau. And I was the fourth generation that didn't go to boarding school. So at boarding school, you didn't speak Nakoda, you speak English. Even my mom would talk about when she was in elementary at Lodgepole, day school, before she went to Flandreau. She said that her grandpa took her to, old Chopwood took her to a missionary to learn how to speak English, because my mom didn't speak English. And so she learned how to speak English by singing. And then when she was in kindergarten or first grade, and she went to Lodgepole, a lot of the kids didn't know how to speak English, so the teacher would tell them, if you need to go to the bathroom, you need to say it in English. And they didn't know how to say it, so she said they'd just sit there and wet their pants. So at lunch or recess, she would take them all out there and teach them how to ask to go to the bathroom. Because she said that was really mean, that they'd have to sit like that, because they didn't know how to talk English. That's my mother's first language was Nakoda and Gros-Ventre. My dad was very Catholic because his mother was a very Catholic lady. So in order to fit into society or fit in with the community, my mother's family is very cultural, which means they didn't believe in Catholicism. So in order to fit into society, our folks had us be Catholics, and also we had to learn our culture. It wasn't one or the other. We had to do both. And one was the cultural part was just to carry on the culture, because it was always carried on. But the Catholic part was just to fit in with the community. Probably my traditional ways. The reason for that is because that's what I grew up with. And then when my kids grew up the same way, we'd always have, when I was younger, and my grandma, great-grandma and them were alive, my grandparents were alive, a lot of the ceremonies was hidden because they would tell us, don't tell the teachers, don't tell your teachers, they're going to throw us in jail. And it wasn't until I was out of high school that I realized that they didn't pass the right for Native Americans to have Sundance till 1978. And so all that time they were telling the truth. They would say, don't say nothing, because it was against the law to practice your native religion. But I did learn the way of Jesus and the Catholic side. Learned both ways, I guess you'd say. But my mother always made sure we learned our culture, because she said, you're not complete without your culture. Lodgepole. Went to Lodgepole for I was the first Head Start group to graduate from Fort Belknap, and I was in Lodgepole. And that was when Head Start began, that summer of 65. My mom got a pilot program from Billings, from Mayor Fox in Billings, and he said, do you want to do this pilot program? And so she was hired as a Head Start teacher. Lucille Tucker was the assistant, and Mary Stefan Jones was the cook. It was done during the summer. And that's the first year they had Head Start in the nation. And we were the first Head Start program for Belknap. And then from there, kindergarten at Lodgepole, K through 8th grade at Lodgepole. And then there was mission school, but the high school was getting established at Hayes, but they always had the mission high school. But my parents Harlem would send a bus out to Lodgepole and Hayes and collect the kids that wanted to go to school in Harlem. My dad was the bus driver and janitor in Harlem. So he would pick up all the kids and bring them in. And then I was one of the ones, in fact, my brother John, all the way down to me, we graduated from Harlem. My two younger sisters graduated from Hayes Lodgepole. Lodgepole is very, contained, or in the boondocks, I guess you'd say. We grew up with TV later, probably in the later 60s. My folks would buy TV. But we grew up playing outside all day. Folks would say, go play or get on your horse. And so you'd stay on your horse all day and ride around. And when you got tired, your horse would wait for you because your horse was your babysitter. Or you'd go sit on the hill and watch people driving around. And in those days, they didn't have paved roads. It was all gravel. It was slower back in that time because you didn't really go to town. I probably went to Havre maybe once or twice a year. And usually you just stayed out there. And the store was there, so if you needed candy, you get candy at the store. But it was more close-knit. You know what I mean? You had your grandmas, you had your relatives all in that area. Back in the day, there was still people that drank and stuff, but you knew to stay away from them. But it seems like it was a better society than it is now, with the internet, with phones, stuff like that. It was more closed off back in when I was growing up. And the kids got to be kids. They didn't have to be adults taking care of other people. Everybody took care of each other. There's always somebody there to watch you. You're never left alone. Grandparents or somebody took care of you. You know, you always had a place to go. You had a place to eat. You had a place to be warm. It was safe compared to now. Now it's the community is kind of more split up, and people moved away, and maybe looking for better jobs or whatever. But it's not as close as knit as it was back when I was growing up. My mom and dad were children of the Depression, 20s and 30s. So when they grew up, they didn't have much food. So when my mom and dad got married and had 8 kids and plus others they kept, they would, my dad always made sure he had cattle. He had cattle, he had horses. My mom had her chickens. And my mom always raised a big garden because she would can all of her garden. My dad built a cellar in the hill. And my mom would put all her canned goods in there. And my dad would put all the spuds and cover it with hay. And then in the wintertime, he'd go in there and get spuds or squash or whatever they grew. And if my mom went canned goods, she'd, send us over there to get them. And then they'd close up the cellar so it wouldn't get too cold. So we always had food. We had chickens. We had our eggs in the fall. When the chickens would grow up, my dad would slaughter them. We'd pluck them. He'd gut them. And then my mom would freeze them. So there's always an assembly line of food. And then, because back in the day, I don't remember getting commodities or food stamps. But my folks always made sure. And then we had a milk cow. My dad had a milk cow for my mom. And my brothers and them would milk her. So if mom wanted fresh butter, she'd put milk in jars and she'd put them behind my brother's horses in their saddlebags. And so they'd race all over. By the time they get back that evening, she'd have fresh butter. And so she'd put that butter. Didn't have no refrigerators back in the time, so my dad would make a box and he'd line it with tin. Put it by the creek. That was my mom's refrigerator. That's where she kept her milk, her butter. My mom made cottage cheese. She made cheese. She kind of made just about everything. And then, they were very self-sufficient because they didn't grow up like that. And during the Depression era, they were always hungry. So they made sure that when they had children that we weren't hungry. We always had a roof over our head, clean clothes, stuff like that. So we didn't really worry about what we ate, but always pick berries, grind our choke cherries, and those you could dry in the sun, put it away for the winter. My mom always made dry meat. My dad would say, "That mountain fed you guys, so don't be making fun of that mountain." That's what he'd say. So basically, my mom did a lot of dry meat. Antelope, she'd make dry meat. The deer meat was dry meat. Then she'd put it away, put it in a sack, gunny sack, and hang it up. And when they needed it for the winter, they would use that. And my mom taught all her daughters how to cut up a deer and how to make dry meat, old style. And in turn, she taught us, and in turn we taught, our own kids about how to do that. So basically, and my grandmothers were always into that. Everybody always shared their food. Nobody never went hungry because, they always had extra food around that they had. My grandmothers on my mother's side were very into healing and stuff, herbal stuff, plants. My great-grandma used to take me out and we'd go look for plants. And my grandpa and my grandmothers did the same thing because they wanted to keep that culture going, just like the language. So a lot of it was modern and a lot of it wasn't. And that's what I mean about living in some place where it's isolated. And then later on, nowadays it's totally different. My mom spoke both the Gros Ventre and the Assiniboine. And the reason why she spoke both was her grandmother was full Assiniboine, but her grandpa was half Gros Ventre and half Assiniboine. And so in order to communicate with her grandpa, she learned Gros Ventre. And in order to communicate with her grandmother, she learned Assiniboine. And my mom's grandma and grandpa, my great-grandpa would die when my mom was 10, but her grandmother lived into the 70s, and she would die later. But they were both people that were Plains people because the reservation wasn't established yet. And my great-grandma, she would dress like a long time ago. She always she wore her moccasins. She had her couple of dresses on, her belt, her scarf. She never wore a coat. She always had a blanket. So she was still from the 1800s when she was born, and she still dressed the same way up till she died in the early 70s. But my mom had to communicate in both languages. At Lodgepole, there was more Assiniboine because that's where the Assiniboine was established, their community. So the language was more Assiniboine. My mom's grandpa was both Gros-Ventre and Assiniboine, so he was also a tribal police officer, so he had to speak in both languages in order to, haul people to jail or whatever back in the day. I think back in the 70s, the tribal council had a house set aside for to take care of the elders. And all them guys that were in that, my grandpa was one of them that was in that house, old Grandpa Boots. And they would hire young people to go in there and take care of, feed them, make sure they were fed, make sure they were clean, stuff like that. These were a bunch of old fellas. I think there was OG, Grandpa, Gus Rock, and a couple of other guys. It was a place for them to sit around, talk to each other, have friends or whatever. They weren't by themselves. I think the tribal council should set up some type of place where people can die on the res instead of dying in the hospital or dying in a rest home. Have some place where, even if it's long-term care or something, where they can hire people to take care of them or whatever, so they can die at the agency or die at Hayes or die at Lodgepole. Some type of home for people, because everybody gets old. Nobody stays young forever. And if your family don't take care of you, or you don't have a daughter or granddaughter who will take care of you while you're old, then they just end up putting them in the rest home, and that's where they end up dying. Instead of learning from them about their culture, learning from them about their language. Old people have a lot of knowledge, but people don't. People are so busy working, and I'm guilty of that too. When my mother was staying with us, my youngest daughter quit working to take care of her grandmother. And then, my mom stayed with us, but my daughter took care of her, and then I'd take care of my mom, and my daughter wasn't around. But my daughter would say, I don't know if you want to put this in your paper, but she'd say, I changed my niece's diaper, and I changed my grandma's too. And don't worry, Mom, when you get old, I'll change yours too. That's what she told me. And there's very few young people that will take care of their elders anymore. Before, the elders lived within the home, like my great grandma, and she lived with her daughter and her husband and their children until she died. So she died at home. My mom died at home. And a lot of people don't want to keep you once you get old. They put you in a rest home and put you away somewhere and go visit you once in a while. But that's where you end up dying. So it's not that close-knit anymore, where you keep your family and, somebody else takes care of them. But I think that's one thing. They need to get long-term care or something on the reservation for these elders, which they had in the 70s. And every time we get new council, they always want to change things. They change it around, or they need the money. Just like that courthouse at Belknap, that used to be a youth ranch. And there was back in the 70s and 80s, there was kids that would live there that didn't have no other place to live. And that's what it was built for. And then now they have it as a courthouse. There's no place for those kids to go. But before that, they had dorms there, where the kids would go to high school or junior high or whatever. And then they had matrons that would feed them, take care of them, watch them. And that's why that courthouse was built. Then all of a sudden we get new councilmen that have new ideas, but those old councilmen, they didn't get paid for the job like these guys do, but they did it from the good of their heart. And they seen the need. But nowadays, and I hate saying that, but these councilmen are just there for the money. not for the good of the people, but maybe they are. I don't know. I shouldn't be saying that, but that's just my opinion. There's actually 10 nations in Canada that are from the Nakoda. There's 2 nations in Montana, here in Fort Peck. So technically, if our language becomes extinct in the United States, we can always go to Canada and retrieve the language from one of those 10 nations in Canada that speak the language. And it's like the Sioux. When I was going to grad school in Montana State, I was with these group of natives, and this one Sioux guy sat down and he said, "I'm Lakota," and he said, "He's Dakota, I'm Lakota, and you're Nakoda. We finally united. We're all one people." And I thought about that, and he said, the Nakoda disappeared, and they thought the tribe became extinct. And so they wrote dissertations, and doctorates wrote dissertations about how the Nakoda people disappeared. They know what happened to them. But they didn't disappear. They became a different tribe, which were the Assiniboine. So if you need to know your language, if you need to find out your language, there's the 10 nations in Canada, which live way up there with the Bush Crees. And then there's also the language program out of Indiana. Indiana won the national football, college football, but Indiana University, where they have the language there, which they saved from the 1920s. And I know Tuffy uses that with his language program at his Lodgepole. Might cost you money to buy, but it would be worth investing if they already have the curriculum. So as far as the language disappearing, I think the language will always be there. But what people need to worry about is the culture. Is the culture going to disappear along with the older people? It was never taught to the younger people. Because I run into a lot of people my age that tell me their parents didn't teach them about being Indian. Even here, even doing different things in here, and they'll come and ask me about it, and I'll say, well, this is what I was told. I don't have my mom anymore to ask, but just from what she taught me and what I learned, and from my grandparents and stuff. But you got to remember, the mother teaches the culture, so the mother in turn will teach the children the culture, and that's the belief of the Assiniboine, is that the mother will teach culture. So if your mother knows culture, she'll teach you. In turn, you'll know it, because the mother is the teacher of culture. I never win, but I danced, because my grandpa, Andrew Gray, is married to my grandma Jenny. And they started Lodgepole Juniors back in the 60s, and we'd go perform around. And my grandmas would make everybody costumes out of, ribbon dresses and stuff like that, out of material. Because there's too many of us, so they couldn't bead, so everybody got an outfit made from old ribbons or whatever, but everybody was proud of their stuff. And me, I was always a redhead and blonde, so I never really fit in, but it was still part of my culture. My brothers I had one brother that would grass dance. I had a sister that would traditional. When I was young, I used to do the fancy shawl and just stuff like that. But my dad would always say, if you guys want to go to powwows, you got to dance. And if you want to go to rodeos, you better rodeo. But if you don't do nothing, you stay home. So when you're young, you want to go places. So you do stuff to go, you know what I mean? I babysat when I was younger, but when I was a teenager in high school, I was a waitress at a restaurant in Harlem. And then I would work for the tribe, like during the summer and stuff. Pretty much it. Just working for the tribe, then went to college, come back and work for the tribe between college. And then out of college, I taught 1 year in Lodge Grass, and then I taught 36 years at Hayes Lodgepole as a teacher, and then became principal, superintendent there, and then I came to Harlem, and I've been principal here since, so I got about 40-some years in right now. My mother always said that her grandfather always told her that you have to get an education to be equal to the white man. And he told her that they can never take it away from you because you earned that. And so my mother graduated in the late 60s with her teaching degree. Early 70s, she got her master's in counseling, and then she became a grant writer. And teaching has always been something she pushed because she said you could always you get your summers off. If you become a teacher, you get your summers off, so you can do whatever you want. So that's probably the best profession, and everybody looks for teachers. So then I became a teacher. That's how pretty much the whole, I'd say over 3/4 of my life has been working as a teacher or some type of educational. And now that I'm getting ready to retire, I still have to stay busy because I don't want to die fast, you know what I mean? So pretty much worked pretty much all my life, it seems like. So I'll do what I'm going to do if I do retire. Probably my parents. Like I said, my mom always said, she said, if I didn't get educated, Holly, we'd still be poor. And she said, and she'd always tell us that, to all of her kids, that you guys need to get some type of education or get a good job. My dad was a laborer, and he worked hard all his life, and towards the end there, he joined his farming. He really liked to farm. He said that when you plant your crops, it makes you feel good. And then when I went to college, my dad was always giving me money on the side, $20 or whatever. But $20 was worth a lot of money when I was going to college. So he encouraged me a lot by, that way. My mom encouraged me a lot by talking to me, but when I get lonesome for home, because, when going to school in Billings, 18 years old, I'd get lonesome, and I'd call her, and she'd come get me that weekend and bring me back because she didn't want me to quit. And so, probably both of them. And a lot of, older people would give you money because they don't want you to graduate. So probably my folks mostly were the big pushers in that, and to get educated. And you kind of have to want to do it yourself. Because if you don't have that push yourself, then, people can't push you into doing anything you don't want to do. So you have to have it yourself, too, to want to go to college. Like my brother Dean is a couple years older than I am. Retired from Lander Schools, 40 years in the Lander Schools as a maintenance boiler man. Retired, he said, I got bored. I said, well, what you going to do? He said, I went back to school. Back to school at 65, I think. No, 64. And he was retired. Got his bachelor's degree in teaching. I said, why couldn't you do it sooner? He said, I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And so my brother's retired 40 years, goes back and gets his bachelor's at 67, 68 years old. But he just did that because he said he had to prove it to himself. And he did. And he said, no, I could argue with you now about history. but that's what one of his goals was, and he did it. He accomplished it. And although he was a maintenance and bus driver and boiler man for 40 years, he still had he still wanted to go to college, and he did it, and he finished. So commend him for that, you know what I mean? Growing up was actually, I never really realized till you told me you were going to do this, but when I was growing up and looking back at it was actually a good life. I was talking to my sister, my older sister, about this, and I told her, we had a good life growing up. We didn't have much, but we were warm, we had a full belly, clean clothes, and everybody was happy. But then when you get older, all people worry about is money. Money this, money that, and land, or fighting over land or whatever. But back in the day, people didn't have no worries. All they worried about was surviving. And then as a kid, we didn't have to worry about paying bills or whatever. Ride your horse. Horse was your babysitter. So you laid around, or you sat up on the hill and laid around on the hill, or played or whatever. Being a kid back in the day was no worries, because you had so many relatives, you had so many places to go or whatever, or babysitters. You had grandparents and great-grandparents that would teach you things. You didn't think so at the time that you were learning, but they were actually teaching you stories, they were teaching you history, teaching you about the culture, teaching you about yourself. Nowadays, you don't see that. And it's sad. Sad to think about, because it's not that close-knit anymore. People are just there for themselves. And families aren't that connected anymore. I don't know if it's because of the cell phone or telephone or what have you, but people don't communicate as much with a computer or whatever. Even kids, you have to tell kids, put down your phone and listen. You guys need to listen, or put it away. You have to learn how to communicate with other people, but that communication isn't there anymore. And like you said, go back to the language. My daughter has an app for Nakoda language, and if she'll press something in there, and she'll find out, whatever. The dialect might be different, but it's there. That's how easy it is. So, my mom would say, well, I didn't learn it through writing it down. I learned it through hearing. That's how I learned my language. And she said nowadays people write it down, and that's how she grew up. So there's good things about the modern stuff, but there's also the bad things, you know what I mean? I'm sure I have a cell phone. Mine's a 10 iPod or whatever, but when I'm in school, or sometimes I just forget about it. I'll leave it in my bedroom and leave it there all day, then I'll check it. My kids will cuss me out because I didn't get to FaceTime or didn't get to talk to them. But sometimes I just put it away because I don't like it's too instant, or else I'm just old fashioned. I don't know. Be good to each other, because life's too short. It's easy to die and it's hard to live.